you have your Bibles, turn to Ephesians. And while you're turning to Ephesians, I'm going to have just a little session with the ladies for just a minute while we're turning to Ephesians. Ladies, I know you don't always understand men and know what they mean when they talk to you, so I'm going to translate a little bit for you today so that you will be a little bit wiser, okay, concerning when the men talk to you. In other words, when a man says it would take too long to explain, what he really means is, I have no idea how it works. Or when a man says, take a break, honey, you're working way too hard, what he really means is, I can't hear the game over the vacuum cleaner. And when he says, that's interesting, dear, what he really means is, are you still talking? That wasn't too funny, was it, ladies? When he says it's a guy thing, what he really means is there's no rational thought pattern connected with this, and you have no chance of making any logic out of it. And when he says, can I help you with dinner? What he really means is, why isn't it ready yet? And when he says, sure, honey, yes, dear, what he really means is absolutely nothing. It's a conditioned response. And when he says, you know how bad my memory is, what he really means is, I can remember the theme song to Hogan's Heroes, the phone number of the first girl I ever kissed, every VIN number of every car that I owned, but I forgot your birthday. And when a man says, I can't find it, what he really means is, it didn't fall into my outstretched hand, so I'm completely clueless. When a man says, I heard you, what he really means is, I haven't the foggiest clue what you just said, and I'm hoping desperately that I can fake it well enough that you won't spend the next 3 days yelling at me. And when a man says, you know I could never love anyone else, what he really means is, I'm used to the way that you yell at me and realize it could be worse. And when he says, you look terrific, what he really means is, oh, please don't try on one more outfit. We're late and I'm hungry. And when he says, I'm not lost, I know exactly where we are, what he really means is no one will ever see us alive again. I read the story this week of a father that had a 3-year-old daughter, and she was having trouble sleeping in the night. And she'd wake up several times in the night because of her being afraid and scared. And each time the father would come and retuck her in bed, and he would remind her that Jesus was with her and he would keep her safe. And this happened several nights in a row. She did this over and over again. So finally one night, the dad asked her, said, have you been praying to Jesus to ask him to take your fear away so you'd fall asleep? She said, oh yes, she assured him. I prayed to Jesus and he told me to come get you. You know, it's amazing what things are in little children learn so quickly, especially about the family structure. From their earliest days, children learn the order of a family. They learn immediately the role of the father, the protecting role, the providing role. And it's not something that's taught. It's something that's innate in them, just in the family structure, in the family unit. I had this, experienced this about 10 years ago, ever so strong, and I have never forgotten it. Nathan and I were in Atlanta, and we were going to tour Turner Field. And Haley was probably about 9 or 10 months old. I guess she wasn't 1. She was about 9 or 10 months. And we were, it was in the middle of the week in the afternoon, and I was holding Haley. We tried to hold her everywhere we went because she was the first grandchild, and we tried not to let Nathan and Kristen touch her. But for some reason, they kept taking her back. I don't know, like she was theirs or something. But anyway, I was holding Haley. And remember, she's just a little thing. She wasn't a year old, maybe 10 months. I can't remember exactly. And we were in this concourse at Turner Field. That's Braves Stadium in Atlanta. And we were going to do the tour. And it was just me and Nathan and one other couple. And so this lady walked out and started yelling in this concrete hallway, concourse. Nobody's there. And I guess she thought she was going to have a tour of about 50 to 60 people, and there were 4 people standing there. And she's yelling to the top of her lungs. It's echoing everywhere, and panic came all over Haley. I mean, her countenance changed immediately. She was afraid. It startled her. It scared her to death. And I'm a pretty big guy. I'm much bigger and stronger than her daddy. I mean, you know, especially then 10 years ago, I had him outweighed by 80 or 90 pounds. I mean, you know, there's no way, you know, I could whip Nathan every day, you know, still can, even though I'm 58 years old. You know, this weak, skinny daddy, you know. I'm getting as many digs as I can in on your name. But you know what happened? Immediately, Haley, when panic came across and terror hit her face and she started to cry, she looked immediately at Nathan and reached for him. I have never forgotten that in that moment, in that little child's life, she had already developed in her system, in her body, the innate belief that her daddy was the protector of her. Her father was the protector of her. In spite of the fact that I could outweigh Nathan 90 pounds, it didn't matter to her. The only thing that mattered to her was reaching for her daddy and getting in her daddy's arms and feeling secure in her daddy's arms. There is something that God has instilled in children, in families. It's that innate sense that dad or fathers are the protectors, are the leaders of the home. And we honor our fathers today. There's a verse of scripture in Ephesians chapter 6. I used it for Mother's Day as well. It's Paul writing to the church at Ephesus, and he says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you, and you may live long on the earth." There is a command right there. Paul is quoting, obviously, he's quoting from Exodus, the 10 Commandments, and he's saying, honor your father and your mother. Honor is someone said, honor is the exact opposite of thoughtlessness and neglect. It conveys a sense of enormous importance to the thing to which it's given. It's an expression of value and worth. Honor, and I shared this Mother's Day. I heard a beautiful message from Larry Stockstill several months ago, and he was talking about honor in a different format than what we're talking about today, but he compared it to gravity. Gravity is that law in the universe that holds everything together. If it were not for gravity, everything would be floating around in this room. We would be grabbing stuff because it would be floating around with no order. But gravity brings order to this room and brings order to our world. Everything is in order because of gravity. And he compared that to honor. I thought that was so great because honor brings everything in right order in relationships. When we honor people, which is something that we're missing in our world today desperately. But when we put honor back into our relationships, it brings it into order. Honor is that thing that looks past the person to the position. You respect the position that they hold and you honor them. In fact, the Hebrew word in Scripture, the word for honor, can be translated several ways. It has several meanings or connotations. One is it means to esteem. When you honor someone, you esteem them. And to esteem means to hold somebody in high regard. It's not worship. We don't worship anyone. We worship God the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. We worship God, but we can honor men. Only glory and worship belong to God, but we can honor one another, and we are honoring fathers today. I guess the best word when we say honor means esteem, the best word that we could probably use is the word respect. We respect our fathers. And esteem is probably best defined as a whole lot of respect with a little bit of fear. There needs to be a little bit of fear. I think we're missing some of that today. We don't fear anybody anymore. Nobody can tell us what to do. We don't fear. But, you know, when I grew up, I feared my dad. You know, my mom, she would discipline us. There's 5 kids, and she would do her best to discipline us. And we're kids. Kids are kids. And we played around, and probably when she'd say don't, we'd still do it, and we'd wrestle and fight and do it. But the moment she said, I'm telling your dad when he gets home, it was all different. It was all different. I mean, it was straight. I mean, you hadn't lived until you've had your dad preaching like this in a service, and you sit there and he goes, he's preaching, and he goes, I mean, it's over. I mean, you don't hear another word. If it's Sunday night, you go home as quick as you can. You act like you're asleep. You put on as many clothes as you can put on, and you go jump in bed and act like you're asleep. There was a fear there. And I think if we have, I'm not talking, please understand me, I'm not talking about abuse in any form or any way. But there has to be a level of fear and respect and esteem. And that's what it's talking about when it says honor. It's talking about respect and esteem with a level of fear there. But it also means to model. It means to respect, esteem, but it also means to model. You've heard the line, the greatest form of flattery is imitation. And when you model a behavior, you're actually honoring that person. When you model the behavior of your parents, when you model the discipline, the way they disciplined, or the way they taught their children, you teach your children the way they taught their children. And most of the time, you discipline your children the way your parents disciplined you. Now, I've shared with you my brilliant awakening when I went to college, and at Lee, I took psychology, I took advanced psychology, I took child psychology, I took adolescent psychology, I took pastoral psychology. I mean, I took all the psychology I could take, and I came home one day with this brilliant revelation to my mother. By the way, don't ever take advice about how to raise your children from people that have never raised children. Or people who still have little kids in their home and they're telling you why your kids turned out the way they turned out. It's unreal that people do that, but anyway. I came home with this brilliant revelation to my mother. I was fresh out of Lee, and I knew it all. Mom, I'm not going to say no to my kids. I'm going to reinforce correct behavior with positive affirmation. And she did just what you're doing. Listen, Celeste wasn't even a month old, probably a year old, I don't know. Immediately, that fantasy world burst when kids came on the scene. I mean, and then you end up modeling probably, this happens, you end up modeling, hopefully you have a good model because you model what your parents did. Actually, it is a way of honoring them. When you repeat good things in your life and you take things you saw that they did and you repeat them, that's a way of honoring them. You honor them by that, by your actions of modeling their behavior. And it can be a very good thing. And in fact, you ever kind of come to yourself as you're an adult and you say, man, I do this just like my mom or my dad. I mean, I wash dishes like my mom. My mom's happy-go-lucky, and she just washes dishes, and it's just all everywhere. And, that's why it's a good thing that I do that because Teresa don't ever make me wash dishes because it's a disaster. But I've done several things where I've come to myself, I said, I do that just like my dad. And that's a good thing. You honor your parents when you model their behavior in your life, those things in your life. But also it means to obey. It means to respect. Honor means to respect. Honor, you You can honor somebody by modeling the good things that they give you. And you can also honor them by obeying them. Honor your father and your mother. In fact, Paul begins this phrase with, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Right. Obedience begins in the home. If there's not obedience in the home, there's not obedience anywhere else. Listen, if your kids don't obey you, they're not going to obey anybody. They're not going to suddenly walk out into the world and magical dust fall on them and they start being obedient and respecting authority and respecting whatever they need to respect if it doesn't happen in the home. And so obedience begins in the home in fact, that's what Paul is talking about when he says, honor your father and your mother. Children, obey your parents. It's something that has to begin in the home. One of really my pet peeves, and I'm not up here to preach my pet peeves, but I'm telling you that's what it is. I shared it Wednesday night, is we in our world today, in our society today, we have come to say that 5 and 6 and 7-year-old kids can decide whether they want to be a girl or a boy. Be what you want to be. They have no concept of life. They have no understanding of life. They know nothing about life. Your perspective is constantly changing. Even you, those who said, when I was talking about modeling my parents, you thought, I'm not going to model my parents. I don't want to be like my parents. Listen, your perspective is going to change as you get older. And the older you get, the wiser your parents get. It changes. And so we have come to a day where nobody has to obey anything. And our children grow up in a society and even in a home where they don't have to obey anybody. They get to do what they want to do. And sometimes it just blows my mind that we're so afraid to teach obedience in our home. I can't make them do that. Listen, I don't know. I guess I just come from the philosophy, I was bigger than my kids. I was just bigger than them. That's just simple. To me, we took Megan to school for a year here in Dundee. We did, Megan. Crying her little eyes out. You know what we did? We got her a washcloth so she could wash her face when she got to school. See ya, honey. Pick you up at 3. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school. See ya, honey. Pick you up at 3. It's real simple. And it sounds like abuse, doesn't it? I told a story in the first service. I said after service, Teresa came in there. I said, I probably shouldn't have told that story. They might come pick me up because years ago in Okeechobee, I was the principal of the school, and we had a kid. A mother brought a kid to the school. She couldn't control the kid. He was physical. Now, he was only about 11 or 12 years old, but she's the mother, and he was throwing punches and kicking and fighting, and so she finally, that's what, I don't know if they still do that, but years ago, that's what they did when they had problems with kids. They took them to Christian schools. You straighten them out. It's funny, but it's true. So you know what I did? I physically held that kid for 2 weeks. Her mama would bring him in there screaming, crying, fighting, throwing punches. I mean physically throwing punches. And I would get behind him and I would hold him. I'd sit in a chair. I'm bigger than he is. Now, you can't do that today. And I don't recommend that you do that today. But I was ignorant. And I didn't hurt the kid. All I did was hold him. I let him fight. I let him scream. I let him cry. And you know what? In about a week and a half to 2 weeks, lo and behold, one day she drives up, he gets out of the car, he walks in, goes to class. It don't always work that way. I'm not saying it's always that simple. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. It doesn't work. There are always exceptions to every rule. And I heard a beautiful illustration last week about to encourage parents, because sometimes we try to do all the right things and our kids make the wrong decisions and we feel guilty and bad about that. And this person teaching that said, you know what? God raised Adam. And Adam sinned. So, I mean, I'm not trying to make the guilt on the parents. Sometimes it just doesn't work. What I am saying, my whole point is that we do need to try to teach our children to obey. And obey, and children, you're here. Young people, you're here. In fact, you know what? I don't fear my dad like I used to fear him. I don't have that kind of relationship with him. But I respect him, and I would not do anything to dishonor him. And so that's part of honoring our fathers is obedience, and it must begin in the home. Come on, Josiah. You come on, I'll quit. God always used in the Old Testament, he blessed the family through the father. The father bestows blessing on us. And the father in the Old Testament was the blesser of the family. There's a beautiful story about that in the book of Genesis chapter 27. There's a man in the Genesis by the name of Isaac. Isaac is the son of Abraham. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You might have heard that if you go to church a lot. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, what's interesting is Jacob was not the oldest son. He was not the son that should receive the blessing. Esau was the oldest son. In fact, Isaac was setting it up for Esau to receive the blessing, and some trickery went on. And Isaac sent Esau out into the field. Esau was an outdoorsman. He was a hunter. And Isaac sent him out there to kill some game and bring it in and cook a meal. And after they ate the meal, Isaac was going to bless Esau because the blessing comes through the father. Catch that, men. The blessing to the family comes through the father. And so Isaac, Rebekah, his mother, and Jacob got conniving, and she dressed Jacob up like Esau. Jacob was a very smooth man. Esau was a hairy man. She put hair on his arms and put the scent of game all over him and sent him into his father, and he deceived Isaac because Isaac couldn't see very well. All Isaac could do was touch him, and he felt hairy and smell. He smelt game, but Isaac even says he sounds like Jacob, but he feels like Isaac and he smells like Isaac. And so Isaac pronounces the blessing. I want to read you the blessing. In Genesis 27:27, here it is. Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore, may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's son bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. That is a powerful blessing that he gave to Jacob instead of Esau. Gary Smalley wrote a book about that. There are 4 ingredients of that blessing. I just want to quickly tell you them, gentlemen, fathers, because they're so important for us to continue the blessing. The blessing of God, all of that is received upon us as fathers, and to pass that along. First is the touch, the meaningful touch. He called Jacob close. He thought it was Isaac. He called Jacob close. He blessed him, and he hugged him, and he kissed him. Men, there is something important about your touch on your children's lives. I mean your touch. I still kiss all my children. The guys don't like it. The adult guys. I kiss them. Every time I see them, I try to kiss them. And every time they leave, I try to kiss them. Sometimes I forget, but I always want to touch them and bless them. It may be the last time I see them. And I want to touch their life and bless their life. The touch, guys, listen, I know our touch is not like mama's touch. I understand that. But our touch is so important to their generation before us. Don't abdicate that to somebody else. Bless your children. Put your hands on your children. In the New Testament, you'll notice every time they sent somebody out, they laid hands on them. They touched them. Don't throw that away as insignificant. Touch your generation under you guys. And then also not only the touch, but notice the words of affection. Man, these are powerful words of affection. Ah, you smell, son, you smell like the field. Ah, you smell just like the animals in the field. Actually, those were words of love and affirmation because Isaac was a great hunter. He was an outdoorsman. And that was a smell to him that meant something. You know, there are smells that you experience through your life that when you smell them again, it takes you immediately back to that time in your life, and you have an affinity for that smell. Anybody understand what I'm talking about? You know, I know this is going to sound weird from a preacher in a pulpit, but you know what smell I love? Don't anybody go out and... I love the smell of cigars. Really, Pastor? You know why? When I was 9 years old, I started playing baseball. I loved baseball, football. I loved sports. I played them all through my first coach was an older gentleman who smoked cigars. And I loved going to the field. My mom would take me early. She'd drop me off. This was back in the days when you could do that. She'd leave me all day long by myself. I'd play with my friends all day long. And I'd play, and my coach would be there smoking cigars. And every time I smell a cigar now, I immediately go back to when I was 9 years old and playing ball. And I love that time in my life. And that smell takes me right back there. Isaac smelled the field and he said, son, words of affirmation and affection. Not only do we need to touch our children, we need to speak to them. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad God gave you to me. You've made such a difference in my life. Those words. Listen, again, we love them from our mothers. But I'm telling you what, when a father speaks to their child, it takes on a different level. When the father says to the children, I love you. There's affection there. The third thing it did is it assured them of their value. He said, may God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness as an abundance of grain and new wine. Not only did he touch Jacob, did he speak words of affirmation, but he explained to him the value. The God of heaven will bless you. You're valuable. You're important. Again, guys, don't let somebody else tell your children how valuable they are. You tell them how valuable they are. You tell them that God gave everything in heaven. He gave his son. He emptied heaven just for them. They're that valuable and that important. That was the blessing of the Father to the children. God speaks that over our life. Let's speak it over other lives. And then he also gave them a picture. Isaac gave him the picture of the future. May nations serve you. People bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers. May the son of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. Last weekend, our community, just minutes from us, lived through the horror of a terrorist attack. It's happening all over the world. It's almost every day we get up and hear that. People are afraid. They live in fear. Kids, our kids are afraid. Dads, fathers, we can speak to their future. We know this is not an iPad, it's a Bible app. That's what I read my Bible off. So I'm going to lift this up. It represents the Bible. We read this and we know we have a future. We know who holds the future. We can speak with confidence to our children about the future, that they're sons and daughters of the Most High, that God has his hand upon them, and God is ordering their steps. And you don't have to be afraid, and you don't have to fear what men will do to you. He's coming again. Things are going to change. A new heaven and a new earth are going to be established. And you have a bright future. Things are looking up for you, son. Honey, things are looking up for you. We have to communicate that as fathers that bless our families and bless those around.